We're on. Good to go? Yep. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the August 16th LPEA board meeting. I'll call the meeting to order and let's go ahead and start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's start out with agenda approval. I do have one thing to mention. Does anybody else have any questions, modifications to the agenda?
I'll move the
Thanks, Kohler. I'm going to suggest a modification.
Second.
Thank you for the second discussion. Let's see. As far as attendance, John Mitchell is our only missing. Tim Wheeler. And Tim is on. Great. Hi, Tim. John has indicated a desire to have input into let's see, board action agenda, section 5, subsection A about net metering. And so I'm going to propose, if we can agree to it, that we would flip-flop board action agenda, so section 5 with board reports, section 9. So we would push all three items in board action agenda essentially to the end of the meeting, and we would move the reports up to take that spot. That's my suggestion. Entertain any comments on that?
Do you want me to add the lunchtime to that the agenda or?
Yeah, I'll just mention it ahead of time. I mean, we do have lunch break in here, and Jessica has offered to get us out in the fresh air and take a walk up to the meter room.
Maybe 15 minutes to eat. And then
Or-
15 to walk.
Or grab your food and take it with you, but I think it's nice that they're here and we can get a little bit of fresh air and learn one more thing about what goes on around here. So I guess that would be one more sort of modification to the agenda, not switching times around or anything. So any other comments on that modification? All right. Let's see, maybe we need the motion and second to support that
I
modification.
will amend my motion to have your changes in that.
Okay. Is that all right with you, Kirsten, as well? Sure. Okay. So moved and seconded to accept the agenda with the flip flop of sections 5 and 9. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of accepting the agenda?
Hey, Ted, Ted?
Go ahead, Tim. Yeah,
yeah, I wanted to add a change to the agenda as well.
okay, go ahead, Tim.
So I don't know if you want that as a separate motion. Or,
Well, let's roll it all together.
so I'd just like to add to the executive session, update on the broadband partnership.
Is that all right with the?
It is.
Yep.
All right, moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the agenda with Tim's additional modification to adding broadband discussion in executive session? Okay, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, agenda passes. Just quickly, Tim, you're on Zoom. Please just interrupt. We can hear you fine, but I can't see a hand. So feel free to jump in if and when you need to.
All right.
Yeah, and okay, then let's move on to member comments. Graham, will you give us the preamble?
The board encourages comments from the cooperative from its members. The board asks that each participant's comment pertain to cooperative business. Those wanting to address the board during the public comment period are granted 5 minutes to address their topics. Lengthy comments to the board should be submitted in writing. Formal complaints should be submitted in compliance with board policy. Comments from the public will be directed at the entire board and not to any individual. No personal attacks will be allowed. Failure to follow these requirements may cause a public comment period to be terminated. Copies of our policies and procedures are available on our website.
Okay, thanks. Janelle, can you see if there are any? Looking, yeah, see if there are any members with their hands up. Seems like we don't have any member comments today, so we'll move past that section. Let's see. Is it possible for us to show on Zoom the owl?
Yep, I can do that.
I just think if anybody's logging in, they're gonna be completely uninterested with looking at the agenda.
Okay, so anybody logging in would see this
Perfect. Even not,
without us having it on our screen,
Yeah, I think you fixed it in the last time
right?
a comment was made.
it's not perfect because we keep popping up on the screen, but it's, we assume that that's what the members want to see, so that's on there. Okay, let's move into consent board items. Is there anything in the consent board items that anybody wants to remove and review individually? Joe Dusty.
Yeah, which one is that? The capital credit payment to estates.
Okay, so item C under consent board items. We'll pull that out. Kirsten, do you have
Yeah.
something?
The director expenses, please.
Okay,
That,
C and F are gonna get pulled out. All right, seeing nothing else, I entertain a motion to approve the consent board items with those two things removed.
So moved.
Joe,
second,
Rachel, second. Any other discussion on that? Forward ahead.
Just a quick comment, the things that were put in there by Nicole and Holly, I've taken most of those classes and I really appreciate what you put in there. It's quite a good overview of it. You mentioned it yesterday. Thank you, that was good.
you guys are paying attention in class.
Yeah, I think I noticed that.
Well, and yeah, and Kirsten, thanks for pointing that out as well, because that stuff somewhat gets buried in the board packet, you know, it's under consent board items and it's not separate, you know. From that, so it's good to point out there where we might need to dig a little bit to find those things. All right, any other discussion? If not, let's vote on approving the consent board items with C and F removed. All in favor? Any opposed? Or abstentions? Okay, consent board items pass. Let's tackle capital credit payments. Joe, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I just had a question. This is about as high as I've ever seen capital credit payments. Yeah, I was just wondering, is this an anomaly or?
Do we have any of you all comments on that?
He's,
We see Carl's name. Carl, if you're able, I please.
All right. Oh, look how green it is there.
Good question. All right, Carl, and do you have a response to it?
I have not seen that report. Can you tell me what the total is?
$70,507. It seems to be about double.
No, we're looking at 100. Yeah, also
6.
Okay, I mean,
With one retirement of $45,000.
Yeah.
Another,
Yeah.
okay, so that's not
it's unusual, but not, it's rare, but not, it wouldn't make me question it. You do occasionally have some very big ones.
Okay, I was just.
No, it's a fair question. It's usually hundreds of dollars rather than thousands per person. But if an individual has like a business account or a farm account, those can go pretty big.
Well, I need things.
Okay. Let's see, so then,
Just should be the vote to approve that.
just wanted to comment that makes sense.
So yes, I would, okay, sort of take a motion on approval of each item that was second.
Move to approve the capital credits.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on capital credits? All in favor of approving it as is? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, capital credits approved, and then let's move to item F, director expense approval, and I'll give Kirsten the floor.
Sure, just a little discussion before the motion. You know, Tim and I had a little discussion offline. As treasurer, he always has to he reviews these things, and I didn't give him a lot of time to review it. I put it in late. But one of the questions he raised is the annual meeting a mandatory event for directors? And I sure as heck hope it is. He has since agreed that because other directors got paid, so he's no longer saying I can't be paid for it because other directors were paid for it. But his question came up of, it's not a mandatory meeting, and I was thinking, wow, it sure as heck better be a mandatory meeting. What else, or why wouldn't it be?
Especially this year, we had a special board meeting, right?
Yeah, you have to have a board meeting before, that's right.
So, because of that, I mean, you know, we compiled the times, right? It wasn't sort of like there were two meeting
Right,
attendance credits,
Right.
but particularly, I mean, particularly when it's mandatory for us to approve new members before it because of an election.
right,
If I would say that
Okay.
the special board meeting is always going to be there.
okay. It was worth bringing up. I really appreciate Tim's attention to detail and catching that, and so that was perfect.
Yeah, and I would have had a different, I guess, thought in my head. I don't know if it's an opinion or not, but I would have thought that the annual meeting, you know, in my very short tenure on board, I would have never thought the annual meeting was a mandatory attendance. So I think it is good to bring it up, clear it up, and maybe somehow even, I mean, I guess we're making it clear now. So, Rachel.
I was gonna say, we've asked this in the past, and I remember this when David was still here, but it was optional, so are we saying it is not optional? I know for me, like I was presenting that night, not, but.
Well, and, you know, these meetings are mandatory as well, and occasionally members, or you know, occasionally board members aren't able to attend, so, you know, mandatory just means. But I guess, Graham.
But yeah,
I guess that's sort of the.
So, could I just interject here? You know, the idea between mandatory and discretionary is really a budgetary thing, I think, rather than whether you have to attend or not. And that was where I was going with this sort of, is this a part of the discretionary expenses, or is it part of the mandatory expenses for how we record them, right? As a budgetary item. So if you go to a board meeting, that's mandatory. If you go to an offsite meeting, right? Currently, there's a difference between whether it's mandatory or discretionary for budgetary purposes or for budget recording purposes. That was where I was coming from. I'm not trying to open up a can of worms about whether you have to go to the annual meeting or not. Although, and I couldn't hear everything here, it sounded like Graham said there was a special board meeting. When I reviewed how many people were there from the board, I just would question whether there was a quorum for that meeting. So that's another different question. Anyway, clarify mandatory discretionary was budgetary financial recording. which is apparently one of the jobs of the treasurer to review that kind of stuff. So I was just trying to fulfill my duty.
So, yeah, kudos Tim for doing a good job as treasurer there. And I think there is less discussion about whether it should be mandatory from a budgetary standpoint. And then there is still this open item about, whether we are doing business there, whether we do have a quorum there. And I'm not sure we could.
I would recall we had.
We had a quorum by one. I was sweating it until the last 5 minutes, but we got to a quorum for that special meeting.
Okay. Kirsten?
And that's an important special meeting because we're voting in members who have joined since the last meeting. So if we don't vote them in, they have no vote. So we are silencing our members
Right.
if we don't meet. So yes, it's, if you don't show up, you don't show up,
Right.
but we have to have a quorum. So if you're not gonna be there, let us know so the rest of us can really work at it. And I think we all knew who wasn't gonna be there, which was perfect. And we knew we were gonna be there by one, otherwise we would have been pounding on doors.
Right. There. Okay, great discussion. I don't think we need any action from that. I think we sort of have cleared the air a bit on those topics.
So I move that we approve the director travel and training request.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rachel, second, moved and seconded. Any other discussion on director expense approvals? Okay, all in favor of approving that? Any opposed? Or abstentions? Okay, thank you. Passes. And that gets us through section 3 consent board items. Moving on to section 4. CEO and staff reports. You want to take over, Jessica?
Great, thank you. So first of all, I'm gonna have Elizabeth introduce our 2 interns in the back. Sorry, guys, but spotlight. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
I'm happy to. We actually had 5 interns this year, and we're lucky to have 2 of them with us today. So Alex Mottler is over here on. Yeah, Alex is a Fort Lewis graduate. He majored in physics and minored in engineering and coaching. And he's been working with our grid services solutions team. Dan, you want to describe his exact?
Sure.
project?
Yeah, he's been helping a ton in our DER front, distributed energy resources, trying to keep a lot of those resources online, making some calculations and calculators, reviewing some of the net meter, more complicated installations. Alex recently received his NAVSEC certification, so he's can be a qualified solar installer.
Hey, Alex. And then we also have Jake Baldy, who is also who's a DHS graduate, 2021. He is about to be a junior at Harvard, and he's been working with our communications team, although he studies economics. So his task this summer was to research a CRM tool so that we could better serve our members. So he has spent the last few months working with our communications team on that project, and I think they have found a great tool. And Jake is actually leaving to go back to school. Well, his last day with us is tomorrow, so we're sad to see him go. But these guys have been absolutely amazing to have around campus and have contributed greatly to our team. A lot of shadowing and observing, and that's why we're here. Big picture.
Well, thank you to the interns and the ones that aren't here, and then also especially thank you to staff for enabling this. And it's one of our, it's one way that we are a great community partner. We really are offering these opportunities, but also gaining their resources, which sounds like it's amazing. So thanks on both sides.
Thank you. Yeah, and Elizabeth, we're adding one more intern, is that right?
Yes, we just had an intern start last week in our GIS department. And then we have one more spot available, and we have another interested student, so we may bring one more on this year. And we have a really flexible program, so they can, like Jake, for instance, can work, just during summer, because that's when he's here, but we also have the ability to kind of work with their school program. So it's not limited to just.
And we partnered with the Economic Alliance. They pay for these, yeah, I can see Kirsten looking at me. No, we do this with the community as a grant funding. So this is how we are allowed the opportunity to bring in these interns. So this is the largest intern class we've ever had at LPA, in partnership with our community partners in Fort Lewis. And so wanted to thank Elizabeth, she really spearheaded this, often met with a lot of community partners to set this up. So thanks for doing that.
I appreciate that answer, because I was so concerned that Alex and Jake were gonna have to sit through this meeting and not be paid for it.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Okay, you're the sample size of 2, but often I feel like we don't hear as much from our younger populations about the co-op and this whole business model and what kind of connects with them. And so what have you found surprising about looking at a co-op? What did you not expect?
It is here. Everyone's been so helpful, and this is kind of new to me, the energy sector, so everyone's been kind of instrumental in helping me learn. I can kind of piggyback off Dan or like any one of his employees. Been just super helpful to help me learn. It's been awesome here, yeah. Some I didn't expect.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, just the whole economic model of cooperatives, like this whole like classes on utilities and the economic challenges of having them. So being able to work here and see like how cool the cooperative model is and how that, works with communities and government, it just all works together to keep the lights on for everyone. It's just really cool to see that. It's something that I think is underappreciated a lot sometimes when looking from the outside in. So just seeing this perspective is really cool.
Nice. Thanks for sharing.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Just real quick, I just want to compliment LPA staff. I've had to have interns, which is great, but it does take extra time and everything. And I'm glad that LPA as a co-op could have so many interns and get the youth interested in this, but it also takes extra staff time. So I'd like to say thank you to the staff. So appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So Drew, do you have the dashboard up for the public?
Can do.
Please. Thank you. So the first slide that you'll see when Drew gets this up is actually part of the safety dashboard, the dashboard about safety. Again, Elizabeth and her team hit it out of the park. They hosted a safety day for our entire office. And it was one of the most amazing feats I've seen with how to organize groups. And her team, including like Janelle and others, came together and created these cards. I should have brought one, but every person gets a card with their name on it and they're scheduled for the day, and you're color coded into different groups. And so we had, how many participants outside?
We had 17 individual presenters.
Yeah. And it ranged from health, fitness, safety. We had the police department, fire department. As you see by this picture, Flight Life came and landed in our yard here. And then they got out their equipment and they talked about the importance of how to find people in the wilderness. And just all sorts of kind of safety awareness issues, because we do have a lot of line workers that go out in the wilderness to work on lines. So it was amazing to see for us and to learn, but what else was fantastic is that these presenters, the 17 of them, also got to know us really well. And then we also did one of our fire safety, is that right, Jerry? They got the ARC demo out. Yeah, so we did an ARC demo for the police department, for the fire, just to remind them this is what happens when the line is down. So it was kind of a cross education. We had verbal judo that was really great from a police department. The local person came in and taught us about this is how you de-escalate situations, because it seems like you don't hear a lot of what happens in the field, but almost every day we're getting an angry customer or something about some issue, and it's using verbal judo because it's not really us. It may be their personal life situation that we're finding most of the time. We do have people come into our lobbies who are on some type of substance, which gets very scary. And so we're really teaching our front desk to help de-escalate that immediately and then call the police department. But it was really nice to have them come too. So again, thanks to Elizabeth and the team and everybody here who helped contribute, Jerry and his group and Drew and Dan. And we also had a cybersecurity section because cyber is safety. So Drew did actually speak on that issue as well. So anyway, okay. Yes.
Did by any chance, when you were talking about part stuff, did you go over possible situations with car chargers? Or electric cars?
Dan,
Yeah, the thing is a hot topic. Right now, and, in fact, we're actually on one of their, committee or what it is that, discussing some of these things, and, it's interesting to talk through them. Some of them are, rightful concerns, and others are a bit blown out of proportion, and so it's good to talk through them. Good discussion happening right now. You do the part.
yeah, but the beauty is that we're really partnering with the fire, police, everybody, even on wildfire safety. So we're getting really engaged. And I think it's testament that Dan was just asking me on the interview panel for the fire chief. And that's because of his work, both with search and rescue, but also with FADA. So that was really great to hear. We're just really trying to strengthen those relationships.
I think that's great, because I think that knowledge is important for them to
Yeah.
understand what they're faced.
Agreed, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go to the dashboard. We have all green checks, the yellow check, explanation point, cash reserves. I'm gonna have Carl, comment on that a little bit later during his, financial page though. He's been digging into that a little bit more and, has some thoughts around that. Any questions? Okay. Again, no loss from accidents or incidents. This was a really great opportunity to see the picture with the line workers. So the linemen sent Jerry and I a memo, requesting to go to a rodeo. Now, it's not a rodeo that you think about with animals. This is actually a national thing that a lot of line workers do around the nation. APPA sponsors one, NRBCA. And what it is a test of skills and knowledge and speed and safety of these line workers. And they have a series of events that they compete in. And so we had our line crews, kind of do a one here to see, okay, who's gonna create the teams and who's gonna go. And so we sponsored a team, to go to this last one this summer. And they took second place in the cooperative division in the nation. So that is awesome. So what that tells us is that our crews are really well trained. And Jerry and his team have done such a phenomenal job of support, education, helping them. And then they also send an apprentice, is that right, Jerry? An apprentice went to this one?
Yeah, we didn't send one to this one.
Okay, but we have in the past. So just, this is such great work, and the rodeo is just, it may sound weird, but the point of that is just to really showcase them, but also to learn. They have vendors there, they get to see how the crews do the same things we do, and it's lessons learned, because you would think there's only one way to do it, and actually I've learned over time, there are so many different ways to bring power on and to work on these things. So that was pretty proud of that. That's great work.
Just, we do a little local PLA on that too.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's a great point.
yeah.
Once our, yes.
Yeah.
And she is starting soon, so that's great, but we should do that. So I'll, our comms team put something together. Okay,
And just real quick,
yeah.
compliments to your lineman, getting second place or even placing is tough. I used to sponsor the one at CPS Energy, and we'd always go and it's tough, in place on everything, so congratulations. They did the tough good work.
Yeah, and so what we did agree to with the line workers is that they walk the stage, which they did, they get to go to the international rodeo. And so I've been working with Core Electric and Core and us are gonna join together and do a partnership on going and supporting things. Yeah.
Good stuff, good stuff.
Is that Kansas?
Overland Park, yeah.
Yeah.
And-
All right. Keep the light.
Oh, just, I think that this is incredibly important in attracting the best talent to, it's not just how much do we pay, what are the benefits, it's like things like this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So another reason to really get it into the news.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're always recruiting when they're there. Only the best, only the best, only the best.
Nicole, you bring up a good point about recruiting the best, and I think we all have to work better. You just said line worker, you just said lineman. We have to work better on line worker, or we are eliminating 50%
However,
of our population. So I know I asked Kathy to write Wichita line worker song, and she hasn't gotten it yet, but we need that, because she just gets so used to line now. I am so guilty, and we all just need to learn and be better. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I do say, I try to say line worker, because we actually have a dispatcher here. Whose daughter wants to be a line worker, baby here, so it's, you know,
That's great.
That's great. Okay, thank you. I brought up the safety events on here, so any other questions on this before I move on? Yes, sir.
Maybe for Drew, I was just curious on the transferring the server item. And because I don't know anything about this, but it's actually safer to be on the cloud and can we talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It is interesting because the school of thought used to be, you keep it in-house, you can protect it, then you don't have to trust anybody else to protect your data. But actually, the cloud has matured enough. If you're working with a reputable vendor, it can actually be more secure. And so what we were doing for quite a while was our email system was a hybrid of in the cloud and on premise. So you kind of have double exposure with that, but that's kind of necessary while you're in transition. And so what we've done recently is eliminated the on-premise part of it, and we're fully in the cloud. It is Microsoft, and they've got a good track record for their hosted system. And so we feel pretty confident that we're in good shape there.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Good question. We asked some questions. Okay. All right, no other questions. I'll move this one again, just highlighting the line worker rodeo. Okay, so this is wildfire mitigation. We're still on track with this one. You know, just to pause real fast on this, we've been watching the Hawaii wildfires. Please don't read everything into the articles that come out, because we've talked about this. They always sensationalize, they always blame the utility, and they always do this before any of the factual data has been investigated. So we don't really know everything that happened, so we're watching and waiting, but we did have a discussion in our leadership team meeting yesterday about this. And we are going to look at areas instead of maybe routine doctoring in some areas that are high wildfire prone areas with loss of life and property. We will reinvestigate looking at maybe undergrounding those. So we do have maps that have been developed with those high potential forest fire areas due to fuels. We had this conversation, I think, a year ago, because I thought purgatory would be high fire, and it's not, because the trees up there don't hold moisture, and I learned that from John, so thank you. So we are re-looking at those areas again where there's high population centers, and rethinking in our future capital plans, maybe we should go back to the board and say, actually, we'd like to underground. But just to let you know, it is very expensive. It would double the cost of some of these areas, so it would slow our progress potentially, or it would result in higher capital budgets in the future. So just please be aware that would likely be coming. Did you have a question, Rachel?
Yeah, I was curious, what's the, especially in areas like ours, what's the interface or interplay between y'all's mapping and identification of those things as it pertains to power lines and like the Forest Service or BLM, if they look at their mitigation plans or management plans and where they concentrate efforts?
So we use the same fire maps. We use Colorado Route fire map system. It's the same one that a lot of the state entities use. And so our overlay is exactly the same as theirs. Now, all we're looking at is where our lines are, our overhead lines. And so we have individual map for each substation and all of the circuits. And we have two different types of maps. We have one with each service with a rating on it, risk rating. And then we have another map for all of our explosive fuses and the type of vegetation underneath. That's another big thing that we're pushing towards or looking into is non-explosive type devices. They're extremely expensive. And that's one of the big things. It's the only thing is underground and all their equipment. just the cost difference and the time. But the maps are incredible that we have.
And then when, I mean, this is an area I'm so ignorant in, so this might not even make sense, but I know like I have a bunch of friends who are on wildland crews, right? And they go out and they'll do prescribed burns and controlled burns, supposedly it's fire mitigation. So are they also, do they prioritize kind of power? Just having seen how many of these massive wildfires have some tie-in, right, to the power sector, are they kind of building their plans out around and supporting kind of the power?
And being in the forest, I would say no.
Yeah.
Most of our coordination has been with on the local level, city and county. And we've been working together with them, mostly on escape routes in high-risk areas. A lot of our power lines are in those escape routes that they need to clear, so we're helping them when it comes to encroachment and stuff like that.
Yeah, good question. I mean, we're trying to really bump up our coordination with them because they have money to clear vegetation. And so we're saying, well, we're gonna also be in the same area. Let's not duplicate efforts. So let's coordinate more about that. So Jerry's been focused working with Shauna and the team on, okay, let's get the maps out. Where are you gonna be? Let's coordinate this. Let's get the money going further and not duplicating. So really appreciate that increased effort. Yeah.
I wonder if there's an opportunity there. Isn't it like one of our big forest management plans up for revision review or public comment? I know I get it through the winter back in Christine lines, blah, blah, blah about users. But I wonder if there's an opportunity. Again.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a new Forest Service supervisor, is that correct? That I think Elizabeth knows. Yeah. Well, so we were trying to set up a meeting with him and work on coordination, like what you said. I agree. You really need to be working with them on this, and especially in light of what's happening in Hawaii and California. So, yeah, thank you.
I have a friend who lives in Maui, and he was saying that he went down to the beach the day before the fire, and he said that the wires were just oscillating, and it was really bad. Didn't we have a wind event?
We've had
In
several,
June, or-
well, we've had several red flag where it's high winds and the humidity and high temperatures. So we put our Vipers on that one shot. That's the email I sent to all of you. And what that does is it is supposed to not reclose quickly. You have to go out and visually inspect the line to make sure the line didn't fall. Because if you reconnected it, that's what happened in California. They reconnected it when the line was down, or the sparks flew from equipment and started fires. So with this, a lot of the community saying, well, you should just turn off the power to everybody. But there's a lot to consider with that. Like we talked about, if we turn off the power, where would you be turning off the power to? You were hoping that people have backup power, the hospitals, emergency rooms, the pump stations, the water pump stations. Those are all things that's why Hawaii Electric's saying, not so fast. If you turn off the power, you're turning off these locations that supposedly have generators, but they're diesel and they're only lasting for a certain amount of hours, and you gotta refill all the hydrants. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a member tell me he saw lightning strike a pole down by Sunnyside, and it was just a fireball, sparks going every place and dropping down into dry vegetation, except that they had a downpour. So the ground was a little bit damp. But we'd have been blamed, or electric utility would have been blamed if that fire had started. But it was actually the lightning that caused it. It wasn't our fault. The power cut was full. Investigation needs to be done.
Concerning the safety, so you just reminded us about the Viper and not necessarily reopening. And so that may or may not be causing more nuisance outages for some of our things. And it would have also been a sort for some of our members. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you things members. For some of our members. And because of that, it also changes, it can change our safety numbers. Have we seen that yet?
Yes. Goal of 60 minutes per member. I am fairly certain we will surpass that number. And one of the big contributors to that, first was the big winner. Second is going to be the Vipers. When they are on their fire settings mode, if something happens at the end of the line and there's 4 pieces of protective equipment in between them, between the problem and the Viper's still going to open for safety reasons, when normally it would open that last protective device, which means you're gonna have 4 times as many members out of power as you normally patrol. And a lot more to patrol, yeah, and longer restoration times. But for us, it's worth it.
Absolutely. I put that in my elevator speech with my members. It's just, I just added it in, and might be more outages that you see because of the fire.
Well, it was actually just the last thing Kristen said, and I think we've talked about this, but things like that's a really important message to kind of get in front of. Person.
Yeah, that is actually a message we got in front of pretty quickly. So we sent out a press release. It was in our member newsletters on our website. That's one of the main topics we've been talking about. Yeah. Okay. Source clean local power. Right, we have progress on Sunnyside. There's a little hiccup with Sunnyside in regards to Tri-State's filing yesterday. I read it last night. I could no longer study. I don't know about anybody else, but if you want to read it, it's interesting. It has a lot of history, very complex. But at the end of the day, FERC does this. It's fascinating. They say that Tri-State's policy 119 is potentially does cautious. It doesn't allow. We're getting a discount basically for doing our Sunnyside solar, community solar, and it's saying that those co-ops that did not agree to do community solar are not getting the discount, and so they say it's not fair. But they didn't mandate Tri-State to do anything at the end of the filing, and that's what you saw reported last night. So I think what they need to do is they need to go back to FERC and say why it is fair that they're allowing this discount, because it does provide for co-ops to have that opportunity and it avoids Tri-State having to serve that load. So that's where Tri-State saying, well, it is fair and non-discriminatory. So that will put into question a lot of our solar projects for the future. And so we are going to continue on the sunny side, but we really need to pause and wait to see how Tri-State is going to resolve policy 119 for the future. Yeah, so more to come on that, because Tri-State even said it's such a long filing, they're going through it all. Matt Larson has been reviewing it as well, but that summary from Tri-State was what it was basically.
Is there at all a strategy, and rather than slowing down, speeding up, so we'll be far enough along and can't be stopped?
I don't know if it's retroactive, that's the problem. So, I mean, we're gonna go as fast as we can for sure, to your point.
Yeah.
And try to like, hey, Tri-State, please, you know, can you please let this one in, because we started building it on this premise. I think you probably, I would hope we would have a good position for that, Nicole. Because I don't understand why they would ding us if that was the agreement when we started.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I think we'll have to work with that one.
Excuse me,
Does
just-
Go ahead, Jim.
So again, it is challenging to hear what's going on in these meetings if you're not there. So I apologize if I'm interrupting, but did you just say that the community solar is going to have to be put on hold because of this FERC decision?
No, we're not holding on the community solar project. I'm saying any future community solar projects, which we cannot do regardless, because we have already maxed out policy 119, we can no longer build any community solar projects under the current law. I'm just saying if there was an opportunity to do that, we would we would have to wait to see how FERC made the decision on policy 119 going forward.
I see.
Does that help clarify? I'm trying to talk loud.
Yeah, I couldn't hear which policy number, and frankly, you need the scorecard for Tri-State's policy anyway. So, so 119 is not community solar, that's a different policy.
No, 119 is the community solar,
Right.
the extra 2% or 2 megawatts.
Right, so I guess my question, let's back up, is how does that affect our community solar project?
We don't know at this point. That's what I was trying to explain, is that it's been called into question how Tri-State treats policy 119 and the payback or the credit.
Right. So, okay, so is that that's not putting a hold on our project?
No,
We're gonna go ahead regardless.
yes.
All right, excellent, thank you.
And my question, and I do not necessarily expect an answer immediately, since we all just got this last night. Without that $0 add back charge, does this still pencil, and at what level?
Yeah, we are looking into that.
Okay.
We were talking about that too.
Super, thank you.
Okay, and then the last bullet, we brought this up to you before, but Dan and I did go down to Tri-State to meet with them on the EQP, which is the partial contract alternative option. And when we go to executive session, we can provide more updates. Okay. All right, be a trusted community partner. This is another picture from the safety day where line workers demonstrating the arc. Let's see. Okay, so this is the project that we brought up to the board back when we asked for unclaimed capital credit fund to fund beneficial electrification. And part of this was for us to partner with different groups. And I believe Holly, you've been really following this one. And yeah, gave us some leads on this, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, Habitat's been in Pagosa for a long time, and they're a strong community partner.
Yeah, so Holly made the connection for us a while ago, and then Dan's team took it and ran with it, and so this is now coming to fruition, where we're partnering with the community organizations on 3 case studies, all in Pagosa right now with Habitat for Community. So what they were doing is they were they were building these projects for income qualified people, and they were going to do it with traditional energy like natural gas. And so Dan's staff went in and said, hey, if we would use our beneficial electrification fund, can we pay for what you would do to get to electric heat pumps, all electric homes, so that we can also use it as a showcase of contractors? Because we're doing a lot of contractor training, but a lot of the contractors need to see it functioning and see it in place and working for them to really then promote it out in the field. And so this is what this allows us to do, is we're going to electrify all these homes, and then they will be allowed to be a showcase for contractors to come in.
Nice.
So really exciting. This is just one of the things that we're doing for education and community partnership. Yeah.
You anticipate, seems like there'll also be a home owner, home occupier education component that'll be needed just on how to use some of the equipment, just personally, right, with my electric water heat pump thing, I'm like, oh god. Is that something LPEA is, do you envision expanding, this model expanding? Is that gonna be housed in LPEA? Is that something we're training contractors to train home occupiers?
The latter part.
Cool. Yeah, good question. Okay,
Man,
yes,
I was talking yesterday to an owner of an HVAC contractor here in town. And he said that right now, very few exceptions, everybody wants heat pumps. They do not want natural gas, they don't want propane. He said it's overwhelming.
wow.
He also mentioned that with the rebates, he quit even dealing with it. And the federal rebate was really, really hard to deal with. members. The state rebate was impossible. He just can't get it done. But LPA was at least.
Good.
He said it's great. He said we push that one, and he said we've never had any problem with that. So
That's great. Thank you.
Pass that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was initiative for this year, was to actually improve the rebate process, because we worked really hard on that. Yep. And you can do it all from your cell phone now. I was happy about it.
Well, I guess, what Cole said, is there, I mean, do we need to talk to the state, or what do we have to do? Because people, if these rebates are available and they're impossible to get, it's going to discourage people from doing that and discourage the contractors. I mean, is there any political, I mean, can we talk, Bennett's office or?
Yeah, we can do that.
Or
Definitely.
Lockwood or
Yeah,
something? It
yeah.
seems that.
We can talk to the COE, the energy office as well. Yes. I mean, I think some of us are personally going through this, so we'll feel the pain soon and be able to experience ourselves and try to find areas of opportunity, for sure.
And he said he carries carrier product, carrier stuff. And they told him, before you do heat pump, you should have one employee strictly just for to get the rebates.
Really?
He said, "Oh, I'm not gonna put on an employee just for that." So, yeah, it really is, I guess.
Did he say why? Just the application process, or what's the?
I think it is, yeah, I don't know. We can go into that much detail.
Do you guys know, Dan, do you?
Well, I mean, it's still a little early on the early side of declining taxes on some of these things. So I'm curious as to what they're trying to apply for that they're having trouble with, because
Yeah, because right now.
I was about the taxes for 2023.
Try to line up with his name.
Okay.
Holly, the CRA, onto this, the issues of rebates? Not to the best of my knowledge, no. Hopefully you can put a tickle in there.
Tickle.
No, it's not.
Thanks. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we'll move to Carl's presentation on maintaining strong financial health. All right, Carl?
Hello. Okay. Do you have the financial data up on the board still?
Yes, Drew, can you go back to showing the dashboard, please? Yep. Okay.
Just
There
very
you go.
interesting to hear your discussion about wildfires. We have some really bad ones up here in Eugene right now. Very smoky, very unpleasant. So I know LPEA is well ahead of the curve on this. So wish you guys were here. Okay, so July financials, once again, very, very strong margins. I was taking a look at a detailed dive into the income statement, and I thought what was interesting is that we're kind of in expenses very similar to where we were at this time last year. You know, you're about 1 or 2% away from that. We had budgeted for more legal and professional expenses and some more travel, which hasn't been spent thus far, although I know there's a note in the financials that could very well change, especially with developments on power supply. The real driver here has been we forecast gross margins and sales to be quite rightly very similar to 22, and with a very cold winter and a very hot summer, that has been far from the case. You know, obviously heating load in the winter, AC load, especially in our commercial classes in the summer. So sales are close, gross margins are close to $2 million higher than they were this time last year. And with expenses being managed so well, and with that lower legal and professional fees, we're seeing expenses being around $1.5 million lower than budgeted, but very consistent with last year. Some things to point out for the month of July. There's a big variance in maintenance costs. That's not that our guys aren't working. They are doing a heck of a lot of member jobs right now. We discussed this at the Finance and Audit Committee, and Jessica mentioned some of these are very big jobs. So that's what they're out there, but a lot of their labor is being capitalized towards member jobs. So that's where you see that 189,000 next to a budget of 338 for July. That was a really big variance. Once again, admin in general is mainly legal and professional fees. So everything looks very healthy in terms of margins and ratios. But once again, cash is under the target. Monica has told me that it's just over 12% today, likely to be 12%-ish at the end of the month. We'll see how that develops. But at the end of July, a large payment of just over $2.5 million was made to CFC for our quarterly debt service. So that was one of the drivers there. But it's interesting to know, you know, we have a target of 12%, and many days of the month we meet it, and many we don't. We've had the discussion about we don't think it's necessary to borrow, especially at the current interest rates, to meet this target, especially when the cash is going to come in later. So I know it's been discussed, but I think revisiting this and revisiting how we measure it would be invaluable. I know one of the reasons this was adopted was 12% equals roughly 2 months of power bills. That kind of mirrors the kind of domestic budgeting thinking of, you know, if something awful happens, you lose your job, you get sick. If you've got 2 months of expenses in your bank account, that gives you, you know, some buffer. But we just aren't, I think comparing us to a domestic situation isn't really appropriate, because we have thousands of people who pay us, and generally they do. We know we have very small overdue balances. Even at the height of COVID, we were never at the point where money's just not coming in. So I think that's something as a board for you guys to look at. Well, I've given some advice in a memo to Jessica and the rest of the leadership team, so I assume you'll have further discussions on that. Long story short, I am not concerned about the cash levels. It's easy for me to say because technically I don't work there anymore. But if I were, I would not be concerned in the slightest. So, any questions?
Rachel.
I have a question. I don't think this is for you, Carl. Sorry, I miss you.
Thank you, Rachel.
It's more of a thought exercise around operations, and this might be moot, but so we have, I think from last meeting and some other conversations, it sounds like there are these huge member projects that are, I can't remember what you said, but like bigger than, I don't know, capital projects, for instance. And so they're taking all of our team to work on and pulling them off of capital projects. And is that like, you don't, my guess is you don't want to do that at the expense of getting really behind on your maintenance schedule and things like that. So do you, like, do we ever bring in extra contract teams and then assign that extra cost? I know we have the line extension policy, all the costs go to them to do that. But yeah, is that something that that's in place? Especially as it seems like more of these mega projects are moving to our area.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So we do contract with crews that are currently doing our capital projects. And so if we really got behind, I think Jerry's been monitoring it. He would come to me and say, okay, we're getting really behind. we need to hire more contractors, so we definitely do that. It's hard to find contractors.
That's what I was gonna say. at some point.
So this is something we're watching, we're not behind right now. And honestly, when some of these other member jobs end, which will be soon, we'll start hitting the operation maintenance projects. But yeah, we're monitoring that because it could be concerning, but right now it's not concerning. Yeah, good question.
Maybe one more comment. I remember months ago having almost the opposite conversation here where
Yes.
there were a lot of outstanding member projects, but supply chain or permitting or whatever didn't allow those to proceed. And we were able to juggle, and I think that's great flexibility and get ahead on some of fire mitigation and other capital projects. And so, I think there's a lot of value add, in our internal control of these projects because we can do this juggling process. But as we could get behind, and I think as long as we're keeping a close eye on that and doing our best to bring in resources where they're necessary, probably as good as we can do.
Yeah, is this the last time we're gonna see Wilst?
No, we're gonna keep it or just.
Okay. I had to do a search for it, because I'm just so used to seeing it, I forgot her name was there.
That'll be Carl's fingerprint.
Okay.
For now and forever.
Carl, I just want to tell you, thanks. You were very helpful to me, who's totally clueless about the financial stuff. So thanks. We definitely miss you here. So
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that.
Here, here.
And just one last thing for Dave, especially for David's benefit. England are in the World Cup final.
Thank you for that, Carl. I appreciate it. And I would say more, but I still have jet lag. So I rooted for England.
Thanks, Carl. I had just recorded that, not watched it yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim.
That's all right.
It's a good game. It's worth
It was
watching.
kind of foregone anyway.
All right.
Monkey else for Carl.
But I'm gonna miss you anyway, Carl, I have to say.
I'll miss you guys too. I will stay in touch for sure.
And I'm actually calling in from Oregon right now, so I'll come down and give you a handshake, maybe.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, so Dan, thank you, Carl. So
Thank you.
Dan revised the grant tracking section to give more detail, so really appreciated his work on that. So if there's any questions, let us know, but there's a lot in the mix. And yay, we met our annual target already. Yay, of 3,000 kilowatts DER to manage, so that's really great. We heard what you all said about adding a little more context to this, so we added that and what that means in dollars. So that is now included in that bullet.
and is that current? Is that what we're saving now, or is that future?
No, this is what we,
Yes.
Dan, would that be, that's
Yeah, so-
estimated savings. right?
Yeah, there's a whole mix of things. Some of these things need to control. We have the ability to control that once the DER platform is completely configured and set up. So we're building our arsenal, so to speak, and a lot of these savings we are seeing today with the wholesale rates. That's why honestly that number is so small. It can be much bigger than that. And then the other thing to consider is that even though we're controlling 3,000 kW of nameplate things, I might have a bunch of water heaters. When I say go control these, they aren't necessarily all on at the same time. So even though I've got 3,000 to control, maybe only 1,000 kW is on, that we're actually controlling at the time of each. So that's how we want to build up lots, and the more we build up, the more we can control.
Okay, any other questions in the appendix on the dashboard? Or we move on? Yes, Nicole.
I just had a question with cyber incidents, and I was wondering, do we track anything like near misses where, we start to see weaknesses in our armor and then go back through and change?
Let Drew, so say what you can in public session.
Right.
But not.
So we do constantly monitor and tweak things. So for instance, we get a lot of phishing attempts. And so we're monitoring for keywords that we can use to tune our filters and things like that. And of course, keeping all of our systems up to date is really important. Employee education, things like that. So we just try to stay ahead of the game in those respects.
So I just kind of wonder if it's similar to like, you know, when somebody almost falls off the pole, if they're like, hey, somebody opened this email, but they didn't follow the link. So this is like, do you know what I mean? Where you're like, you're seeing like, okay, here's a susceptibility.
Right.
We need to like make sure we're using this information to inform everyone.
Yeah, that's a great example. So in the case of employees receiving emails, we definitely use information. So we send out a monthly phishing test. And so employees who open it, and then especially the ones who take the next step and click on something, we work on education and tuning for that.
One thing that Drew and his team have done that's really forward thinking, because we're better locked down than most co-ops, and I just came back from CEO conference with CREA, and we've discussed our cyber, and his team is further ahead. So I'm trying to connect us with some of the other co-ops so that we can also do training for them. But one thing that they've done is really great is on their emails, there's a little button that says fish. And so I'm probably the biggest user of it, right? But that's also because our leadership team is going to get fished the most, same with you potentially. And so if you can click the button if you're unsure of it, and it goes to his entire team and they check it out, and then they'll respond and say, this is legit, it's not legit. And then what they do is they use that information and then they fine tune the filters even more, so that those things that are nefarious don't get deleted. But it is constant every day, right? Because we're seeing things come through. Whatever you do though, this also came around Thanksgiving, as some of you remembered, you got a fake text from me, so it's even texting. So I think some of you even texted me back and said, hey, I got a text from you, was that you? And I'm like, no, it's not. So even monitor your texting, because that's how they're also using it. Yeah.
So that phishing button is something that's gonna come.
I don't know if it's on your system, it's on all of our internal system, I'm not sure it is.
Gosh, I just always see the jewels.
It's in that orange fish, right?
It's a little button, it's super cool.
Yeah. I just sent it to somebody and it says, yeah. Oh, yeah, if you report something that is a phishing, it says, congratulations, you kept the company safe today.
Yeah, yes.
I'm on a day basis with that.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, does any of the other directors get emails on the LPEA saying that they want to come in and help with our financial bookkeeping or hire somebody? It's always Dan or stuff that Dan's working on. And I'm wondering if you're getting him confused with me, or does everybody else get these?
No, I get them.
They're
Okay,
Fishers.
I believe them, I just.
Some of them are fishers and some of them are persistent. And so I send the fishing button if they're persistent, and then they deal with it.
That's right, so I get a lot of the same people, I probably have how many emails a day, 5 a day, trying to solicit to sell something, and so I click the fish button, and then Drew blocks them. So I just click the button, hit the spam, and his team will block those who come to you. Yeah. Okay,
Good education.
yeah, leader, thank you. Please shut that down now.
Jessica,
Okay,
can
Yeah,
well, you must be able to hear me really well because everyone stops as soon as I say something. So I had a question on the dashboard, the grant for the transit grant. Could you give a little context for how we helped a transit grant?
yes, I'll let Ian explain. that.
Yeah, so the Archuleta County is the agency that's leading the grant process. And they're trying to establish a community transit between Pagosa and Durango. That's going to be an all electric vehicle. So they're asking us about what kind of charging infrastructure would be needed. How can we assist in the formulation and the right wording in these grants to make it sound like everybody knows what they're talking about. When we also help them with the rebate side of things and talk to them about what rebates are available through LPEA and how we can assist on those types of items and what kind of capacity and system upgrades are going to be needed. So we're assisting that. They did win that, and we're trying to get some things squared away and make some things a reality on that.
Oh, well, that's good info. And would that be something where they could discharge to grid?
Discharge what?
To the grid rather than,
Oh, to the grid. Yeah, we're trying to set this up as B2G as well.
all right. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jessica.
Okay, done with the CEO and staff reports. We are at a break. We'll take a 10-minute break. So let's plan on cranking back up at 10:23. And remember, we're going to go into reports right after this. So turn your report and then direct your report after break. And break. As discussed earlier on the agenda modification, we're jumping down to section 9 reports. First thing in there is Graham's attorney report. Take it away, Graham.
They did, so start by just referring everyone to my written report, but
It's 82 on mine.
Yeah, 82. But I will say that one thing that I didn't have on my attorney report was that we did have our small claims case went to trial on Friday, the 11th, and so that came out in our favor. So that's included now, as much as there's a 14-day right for the plaintiff to appeal that outcome. So, and I'll keep the board informed on exercises that right or not, but it was yeah, we're victorious.
So does that appeal stay in the small claim?
No, so it would be appealed to the district court, right? So, you know, theoretically, under the rules, it should just be an appeal. I sort of took a lot of pains out. I want to thank both of our interns, Alex and Jake, were both really helpful in getting me set up for that, everything in place, all our documentation, and they both came and watched it and everything. But I took a lot of time and effort to get as much evidence in as possible so that we don't have to sort of retry it based on new evidence or something like that, that there'll be a sufficient record for the district court to review it without having to have an additional trial. It feels like that. It really is a matter of law, frankly. You know, we stipulated to all of his factual allegations. I mean, there really isn't any fact for him to reintroduce if he feels it, because we agreed to all of his facts. Just couldn't go forward. Any other questions about the report itself?
Go ahead, Tina.
Oh.
Muted.
That sounded like a bad sign.
Tim, you're muted.
Well, he is needed.
Well, maybe he was talking to somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for Graham? Rachel?
This report, it only reflects the work you're doing on behalf of the board, not all of the internal, because we share your time.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, there are a lot of sort of day-to-day operational things that I'm that are at a staff level. And so, like I review, you know, when contracts or vendors come in with staff, we go over that, easements, right of way stuff, employment matters, things of that nature.
Okay, so instead of This is a big oopsie on our adjustment of the agenda, but we have an act now, and so I'm gonna propose we modify the agenda again. I'm not sure how that's gonna go over. We've got Grant to yell at me, or at least advise me on if we need board actions to do this.
I think we can, by consent, take things out of order, to accommodate our, consultant. So if anybody has any objection, state it, otherwise we'll just do this as a matter of consent.
Okay, so then what my intent for us to do will be to give Matt the floor for the attorney update. And then we will continue on as per the listed agenda into executive session. And get through that while we have that. So any objections to that? So we'll consider that consent, and then we'll turn it over to you, Matt, for attorney update.
Great. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So 3 updates, been several movements on the legal front since we last got together. One of them is in Adams County. 2 of them are at FERC. We'll start with Adams County, just for kind of public consumption. The judge in Adams County granted summary judgment on several of the claims that were pending between United Power and Tri-State. The most important one, I mean, there's a couple important takeaways from that decision. Number one, they are going to be going to a jury trial on breach of contract claims. So that's probably the most salient piece of this, is that trial is going to happen. It's probably going to happen this fall. I don't know if an exact date for that has been set, but I believe it's going to be this fall. The summary judgment claims, as they relate specifically to LPEA, are twofold. Y'all will recall, we were in this lawsuit at one time. We withdrew from that for several reasons. The judge found in Tri-State's favor on the addition of the non-utility members that addition did not violate state law. However, the judge also found summary judgment in United Power's favor, saying that the addition of the non-utility members, so that's Mieko, Olson's, Elgin, was inconsistent with Tri-State's articles of incorporation. So right now, those decisions sit as summary judgment granted in favor of the different parties. One is purely as a matter of state law. One is as it relates to Tri-State's internal governance. This case will go to trial. If those are going to be appealed, that will happen after the trial. So that is kind of where we sit. We can talk through some of the nuances of that as it relates to Tri-State's FERC jurisdiction in the executive session. But that's the update from the Adams County side. On the FERC side, still do not have a CTP decision. I expect that decision is going to take some time to issue, which we can also talk about more in the executive session. Tri-State took one action that I think is of note. Y'all will recall that Tri-State had filed essentially like a supplementary tariff to its contract termination payment tariff that required anyone that submitted an unconditional notice of intent to withdraw to execute a withdrawal agreement. That withdrawal agreement, would have different parameters associated with it. It would look a lot like the Delta Montrose withdrawal agreement that Delta Montrose executed in order to exit Tri-State. That was opposed. Numerous parties, including LPEA, intervened. FERC threw it out, so said it could not go forward. That the tariff needed to remain as it was when it was originally filed. We can talk about ramifications of that later today if that's helpful. Tri-State has now appealed that decision into the DC Circuit. So that appeal was filed earlier this week. It will go through the process of appeal in the DC Circuit. That will take some time, but that's one other item of note. Third item of note, to go in the memory bank a little bit. We had reserved issues litigation coming out of the stated rate case. So Tri-State's original rate case led to another case about 4 different issues, one of which related to the allocation of non-network transmission. Judge found in LPEA's favor on that particular item, as well as and adjudicated some other items as well. One related to United Power's battery storage, one related to Solar Garden, community solar, payback structures under Board Policy 119, and one related to unbundling of generation and transmission. FERC has issued a decision, came out last night. We're in the process of digesting that. As a general matter, there were some changes made to what the judge had ordered. Still working through the one on the community solar in terms of what that means specifically as it relates to the allocation, the direct assignment of non-network transmission. Tri-State still needs to justify that in terms of if they're not going to directly assign those costs to specific members. The FERC did change up the rubric a little bit from a standard perspective on how Tri-State needs to analyze that issue. I expect that to have implications and interaction with Tri-State's pending rate case that's in front of FERC right now. So remains to be seen, what, if anything, they intend to do with that, whether they intend to update that filing or not, I do not know. But the decision does have a footnote in it that needs to be considered in Tri-State's current rate case. So that's kind of the updates at a high level in terms of what has happened. Can take any questions. Alternatively, when we get into executive session, we can dive into some of the nuances and what it means across Adams County and also the reserved issues case.
Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, Matt, can I just ask a quick clarifying question? I believe it was for the public consumption. You mentioned that in the Adams County trial, there's the judge ruled in favor of the breach of contract. That's breach of contract between United and Tri-State.
They did not. The judge did not grant summary judgment on that issue, so that issue is going to trial. So the judge did grant summary judgment on some other issues, including the issues involving the non-utility member additions. So those issues will trial.
Great, and then my question, that's not the clarification, but my question was actually, which contract is being breached? Is that relevant? That's just between United and Tri-State, or is that somehow relevant to the whole?
That's just between United and Tri-State, but it does relate to their wholesale electric service contract.
Thank you.
Anything else from Matt before we go into executive session?
Yeah, Matt, you mentioned that the CTP decision is delayed, which we all know. And you indicated that you thought it would be a while before that comes. And just for the sake of our members, is there anything you can give us about why you think it will take much longer? Because last month it was imminent, and now it's longer. So
yeah, the requested decision date that had been put out there was July 23rd. FERC is not bound by requested decision dates, just like any regulatory agency is not going to be bound by the requests of the parties. I think that the question in my mind is, does anything happening in Adams County result in a delay to that decision? I don't know. And I think it's a better conversation for executive session.
all right, so but for public consumption, that was a requested date. Doesn't need to be honored by FERC. There's no obligation.
Correct.
So it could take them as long as they want. Theoretically.
Theoretically, yes.
All right.
I do not think that will happen, but yes, theoretically, they could stretch it out as long as they would like.
Yeah, I mean, qualifying facilities, they let that go for years, right? So
yeah, and Tim, I think one thing that actually is good for public that your question raises is, think about the reserved issues case. We filed our last brief in that case. I was actually looking at it last night. in July of 2022. And that order issued from FERC last night.
Okay, speed of bureaucracy.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Hey, Matt, I took it as hopeful that the reserve, ruling came down last night, thinking that, well, maybe they're trying to move on out of there before they do the CCP. Are they totally unrelated, or is FERC, or is there this part of FERC and that part of FERC and that part of FERC?
Yeah, it kind of functions like a pyramid, right? So when all these decisions get up to the top level, which is where that reserved issues case was, it was also on an ALJ decision. Just like there's similarities there that I think are the reserved issues decision was issued by Judge Hempling, who's extremely thorough. And I don't remember the exact page number, but it was like well over 300-page decision. So those things take time to work through. I think there was less complexity to that case. So, you know, it shows that eventually as these things get up to the top, it takes time for them to vote them out. I don't think they will just let the CTP case hang in perpetuity. You know, I think there's an understanding that companies need to decide their futures, and that this is foundational to that. And I think those points have been made, not only in that case, but also in other cases as well. As we've kind of gone through a significant amount of litigation that involves the intersection of the cooperative business model with the Federal Power Act. Federal Power Act's definitely more made for a different type of business model. So I think there's some friction there.
Thanks.
Okay, then it just prior to going into executive session, Matt helped us out with Kohler's participation.
Yeah, I think Kohler should be excluded from this. I think we're going to need to have some conversations about what this Adams County decision means.
Yeah, nothing further in open section, but entertain a motion to go into executive session.
I
So
moved
moved,
to executive session. Okay.
Yeah, we're going in, Tim.
Yeah, I just
Moved by
made
John.
I like it. That's fine. I'll second.
And we got Tim on second, all in favor. Aye. Any opposed? Or abstentions? All right, we will now go into executive session. Okay, welcome back to regular session. We're gonna do board action as a result of executive session. If anyone has it, I would entertain a motion coming out of executive session.
You want
Here, please.
I move that we approve the salary and bonus structure as discussed in executive section for the CEO.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded by Joe. Any other discussion on that for public session? Seeing none, all in favor? Raise your hand, say aye.
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 We got Tim. Yeah, I'd like to get count.
Sure, let's go to count. You know. And Tim is an aye.
Tim was an aye.
Yeah, I see his hand up. Great.
Okay, and all opposed? And that's everybody, no abstentions. All right, so motion passes, thank you. That is the only action coming out of executive session. And we will move on to board action agenda.
We were on board report.
Surprise. We can do it later.
Wherever you want, just letting you know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And we, you know, whenever we flip flop board action, I think let's just flip it right back now. And get into board action before everybody gets too into it.
Okay.
So as a matter of consensus, does anybody have an objection to proceeding that?
No.
No.
No objection, okay, yeah.
So, board action agenda, first up, Finance and Audit Committee. Tim, you want to, introduce that?
Sure. So the Finance and Audit Committee met August 10th virtually. The report is in the packet. Financial review has already been gone through in this board meeting by Carl. There was a budget update, not a lot of action at this time, just the process. Elizabeth Howe is acting finance VP and walked us through that. Dan walked us through the net metering and qualifying facility tariffs. And I just want to ask Dan, and Jessica, is there a need to provide any of this information from Dan to the board at this point? Is there a presentation? I'm not quite sure. I know there was a lunch and learn. Does the board need more information? And is there a need to present it at this point?
And we're talking about the resolution. Correct. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in anticipation of the resolution, do people understand what we're trying to do here or not? I'm not sure if Dan's been the one presenting this, not me. And so I just want to verify whether the board feels they're able to act on the resolution, or do they need more information? All right, so it doesn't seem like anyone has.
No, I just Kirsten's hand, but she said no.
All right. All right, so out of the committee, therefore, is a motion that we direct staff to post LPEA's proposed net metering and qualifying facility rate tariffs for a 30-day public comment period in accordance with policy 364, right? So the committee is providing this motion. I don't believe it needs a second, but we could have a discussion, I believe, if anyone wants to have that discussion. Feel free to ask questions.
Kohler's hand is up.
So on these tariffs,
Kohler.
Okay.
is this tariffs we're voting on, one for net metering and one for qualified facilities? Just two separate ones.
So yeah, they sort of go hand in hand, in order not to eliminate any kind of interconnection opportunity for systems over a certain size. We created the qualifying facility rates and take those into account for the larger systems.
Good, because I think that answers my question. The question I had was the application fee. We're gonna do away with it if we have a controllable net metering.
Right.
And net metering. If we don't do away with it, then qualify the same.
Correct. But there's a separate credit for batteries qualifying.
Got it. Thank you.
So it's just help me understand, it's two different tariffs that we're putting out there for review. They would be covered under one policy.
They just live as tariffs.
They live as tariffs, okay.
Yeah, so the policy is just our tariff posting policy that we're complying.
Okay.
We're not changing any policies. We're just complying with our policy on how we post tariffs on the living.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Kirsten?
Mine is not a question, mine is a statement. I believe since we are posting this, I think it is worthwhile there are four short points of what the board action is, and I would like to basically read that into the record if I may.
Sure.
I'm just going to read this straight from the motion. So one is limit the capacity of new net metered systems to 50 kilowatt between November 1, 2023 and January 1, 2025. And limit the capacity of new metered systems after January 1, 2025 to 25 kilowatt. Number two is create a new qualifying facilities tariff for the purchase of interconnected renewable generation at an avoided cost rate. Number three is create a provision for aggregated net metering. Number 4 is establish application fees to offset the administration expense associated with interconnecting generation facilities. Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is that if we approve that, that will be posted as part of our documentation. So members can find that. And that both these tariffs, these 2 separate tariffs covered under that one policy, would be posted and available for review and comment and input by all members for 30 days, after which the board would review any of that comment and decide whether or not to make any changes as a result of that comment, or vote to put them into effect, essentially. That would be presumably at the next board meeting if it's beyond the 30 days in September. Anyone?
On that, maybe Graham could walk through the expected timeframe.
So we've been discussing this, Dan, as you can sort of see when we go to bullet point number 1 that Kirsten just read, we'd be looking at an effective date of November 1st. So we would expect the comments to be in 10 days before the October board meeting, and the October board meeting is when the board would approve and vote on this for a November 1st effective date. Does that make sense? So we're basically printing this in the newspaper and putting it on our website for comments. Those comments will need to be in enough time ahead of time for the board to consider them for its vote. Kohler.
So if there is a comment that has us do a little change, is that another 30-day posting?
No, so under the policy, under the posting policy, right, it says clearly, and our posting will say clearly that what is posted will not necessarily be what is adopted based on the comment period. So it can change based on that.
Anybody else?
Did we get a second on Tim's motion?
Tim indicated that maybe it didn't use second.
Yeah, when it comes out of a committee referral, it can basically go straight to a motion. Or it's considered a motion, so at that point, I think this would be the pre-vote discussion.
Okay, so any other discussion pre-vote? Seeing none, then I will ask all in favor of the motion as written in the agenda, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, motion passes.
So, I should have said this earlier, but I'm anticipating we're probably gonna get a lot of questions about this from a fair number of people, so I guess I would just recommend having a good layman's terms explanation of this ready to give to folks either online and handout or so.
Thank you. All right, anything else then, Tim, from finance and audit?
No, unless anyone has questions.
No hands.
All right, interest of time, I'll move, I release the floor, I guess.
And we'll move on to committee on policies, report and action.
All right, in front of you is policy 109. Rand, can
you put that on the screen with the
Graham will be able to address some of the red lines if you have questions on it. In the review, most of it was to streamline it or to get the verbiage correct and accurate. And then the safety measure that was put in place that the committee talked about was to not have somebody hurry up and get back from a conference in Denver or wherever it might be, and that if that took additional time, that time would be extended. You're taking time off and investing it so that last year, the question came up that you were only authorized to travel one way and getting back was on your own. If you didn't make it back the same day, and that language was extended, under a safety caption and to meet with what industry and federal standards already are for travel. So those things are captured in there. One of the outstanding questions from board input was about a separate education policy. We have this, so we're not going to reconstruct policy, but the policy for education does stand. It is encouraged, and at a later time, we can come back and revisit that. I believe Ted mentioned that in his response earlier. So any questions on 109, or Graham, anything that you want to frame in red line specific?
No, I think you did a really fine summary of that.
All right. Then we'd be looking for a motion to approve 109 as submitted.
So,
I actually had a question.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
So we'll have discussion after that.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, so
second.
Discussion before the motion?
Well, I just had a question about the stipends that were designated for directors. I was wondering when the last time, when that $1,000 was put in play, and then you mentioned that you wanted to have the FAC or the budget look at this. I mean, should we have the FAC look at this in tandem so that if we wanted to make any changes to that we're making all the changes at once?
There isn't a number, cost associated change with this.
Yeah, so I think the analysis one, I don't know when last time when that moved from whatever it was before $1,000 for 225, right? But we felt it was sort of outside of the statement of functions of our committee to move those numbers. They have budget impacts that align that we weren't really set up for, and so I think that would really be the only thing that the back would address. It's not a big thing to go through and change those numbers and then the back address them. I don't think it's problematic to bifurcate those or to put this off any longer in order to get those numbers reviewed.
Is that something that the board is interested in, the FAC looking at that number, or looking at an agenda item?
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the point of the, it might fall outside of this, but with our education, that education money doesn't go that far. I mean, I went to one conference, I got $500 left in my kitty. So that would be, I think, a philosophical discussion. Do we want to put more into director education? So I think it's broader kind of. Before we got into the budget, I think we'd have to have more philosophical discussion about what other education opportunities are there, and maybe it's too much. I think, we should be able to see all of these classes at our desktop. Instead of having the Holly at the camp. I think that's. Oh, you didn't camp? Oh, okay. You said you're going to camp, and I thought, anyway, that was kind of nice. My point is, at some point with the education funds, I didn't talk about the stipend.
Nicole, I'll bring that back with some more questions. Bring it back to you.
Sure.
Okay, Dan?
Yeah, a little background on that stipend. That was done years ago. Probably 30 years ago. That was set up to replace insurance for the directors. The directors were covered under the employee insurance policy. And a lot of them old directors, like myself, getting a little bit long in the tooth and having medical problems. And it was raising the rates for the employees. And there was some
For
self-insurance. And so they settled on doing this stipend to replace the insurance. So that's the background of it. Like I say, it's, my dad was on the board when this happened and let's see, 30 some years ago plus probably. And so that's the background on that side.
Polly, you had something?
No.
Or, okay. Anything else?
Yes.
Then on the cultural, Tim?
Sorry to interrupt again. I guess two things. One is there is an unequal distribution of workload amongst the directors, especially those on the executive committee. So if there is ever a discussion around stipend or whatever, one might consider the different roles and have a different stipend for that. I know the board president does a lot of work, and I know the treasurer does as well. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we take that up here, but just a comment around that stipend. So the other piece is that, and I did put in a comment into the red line that I don't see in the current one. I gave input, which is that the treasurer under this policy is supposed to review and at one point approve the expense reports. I see Graham's comment that they put the onus of approval back on the board somehow. I didn't really understand exactly what was intended there. But I think the key thing here is that I had suggested a time frame for getting those expense reports provided. And that has not changed in this updated red line. At the moment, it could be read that, you know, if I were there today, somebody could have handed me their expense report when we all showed up at 9 a.m. And that has happened numerous times in the past. It is unreasonable to expect a review in that period of time. So my suggestion is that we move that to, expense reports that want to be voted on at a particular meeting, being just like anything else for the board packet. If they're not in the board packet, they get moved to the next board meeting rather than expect the treasurer to review them all and the board to approve them. It takes a lot of time sometimes, especially with new directors. So I would argue for a change that says, and I think I put some sort of language or suggested language previously around submission of those expense reports have to be in a board packet to be voted on. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. So in direct response to Tim's suggestion, having approval of the treasurer of the board seems unnecessary if it's budgeted. If it's budgeted, what I'm hearing is if it's budgeted, you don't have to review it. So why are we reviewing it? I know some of this came up when people were being fair and petty on the board about, oh, they're spending more money than I am, blah, 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 but why are we doing it?
In the committee, our discussion, Graham reframed this if I get it off, but it was to make sure that the board was approving it, not a treasurer approving it discretionarily. It would have to be in the packet, and we didn't, this verbiage represented, yes, the board will approve it. It's associated to a budget. It had probably gotten approved previous if it was associated with training or travel. So we thought it sufficed.
So why is there a board approval process?
Well, just in the consent board items, we approve.
Why?
To make sure it follows policy.
Okay, so for instance, we don't right now review the CEO's expense reports because that got all
I don't
approved.
think we're talking about the CEO here, are we? We're talking about directors on the board. And
Right, but the reasoning for it. I'm interrupting your interruption. The reasoning given for not doing that was it was already approved in the budget. Why are you wanting to see it now? And the reason for me is, well, everybody needs to have somebody looking into their show. So that's my reason, and I'm okay having something put it in my shoulder, but so we're basically saying, this is the policy of your board, this is the policy of your staff. And I think they should be fairly consistent as far as somebody needs to look at that.
So ours is being looked at, so you're good with that
I'm good with us looking
in
at
this
that.
policy, okay. The question is the FAC looking at CEOs? Is that the question?
That's the only one to look at, or his too, I guess.
Yeah, and I thought there was somebody that did look at that. Isn't there a committee? The executive committee.
They only look at the discretionary, so the $10 that was spent at lunch, they don't look at it. All the stuff that was budgeted in the same way that we budgeted for all of this education. So we go to the education and then we have to approve not only going to it, but then approve it after we went to it. So we're not holding the same standards. We're not holding CEOs, same standards we're holding ourselves, and one or the other should get.
Okay, and you like it in 109 with oversight?
Yeah, I think oversight is called for.
Okay, as we have it written?
Yes, thank you for getting to the gist of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And maybe,
yes,
I would just comment quickly on Tim's comment. My feeling on this from community on policy is it's fine. It doesn't need to be as prescriptive as to define the timing and the dates. Honestly, Tim, I think you as a treasurer are required to do this review. It doesn't say when or how often. And you tell board members when you need to see their thing or it doesn't go in the board packet. And there's just this thing about how prescriptive do we want our policies to be versus leaving some legitimate leeway to the actors themselves. And from a policy standpoint, we want it to be prescriptive enough that it can't get circumvented, that the review does happen. But I don't know that we need it to be that prescriptive. I certainly wouldn't want to tie it to, some other policy that says the board packet comes out on this day or something like that, because then you have to track changes between these multiple policies. And so having some leeway in there, I think, in my opinion, is tolerable, and I don't mind it the way it's currently written.
all right. Then we'll take it back to Nicole's statement. I believe in reference to the stipend, asking about it from the FAC. We didn't see it as the policy committee's perspective to recommend a change to that. But with that, are you asking that question to see if maybe there's time for adjustment for that now? Not that it would have to be on this version of 109.
I was asking two parts, I guess. One, if one is there interest in the board in looking at that number? And I think Tim brought a really good point, even with having some demarcations within board stipends. And then I feel like I got a couple head nods, look at this, because it seems like the timing would be good if the FAC looked at it prior to, budget season's going on. And then I was wondering if, hey, we should wait on posting this till we have any additional changes that we might make. But I was given the advice that that's not really important.
All we're gonna do is change a couple of numbers behind the dollar sign. I think that's pretty straightforward for that. Thanks to I mean, I will say, I appreciate everybody's sort of patience with this draft. It's been around the block for several months, this policy. And so the red lines got completely unreadable and I had to sort of condense them into this draft. So, and that's sort of like where Tim's comment, I tried to recapture it, but I did my best I could to sort of recapture comments from previous drafts.
And so if we think we, as the board, have more work on this, we can take it back to committee. Feel like this is a good document. That's why after some months of not bringing it forward, we did after our last committee meeting. And then it could stand with whatever changes we wanted to reapproach with it. And that might clean up some of the red. Kohler.
Question. So I want to make a motion to approve 109 as it's shown in this red line.
Second.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motions first. Motion is moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Kirsten?
Yeah, as pointed out, my concern with this is this is really a director compensation and insurance and travel policy. And there's just like one little sentence about education that it would be a good idea. And you had said it's going to be something to be looked at. In order for me to vote yes on this, I would need to know, when is the committee and policy going to look at this, and when are we going to get serious about director education?
I don't think we're not serious about director education. This isn't trying to frame that up in any way. In fact, it says we encourage it and support it, and we feel like that's still what the staff and the board does, funding it and having it available for members. So it isn't to shortchange it. We were going to try to go through from last year's start, and I wasn't on the committee then. So Ted, if you need to frame this for me, the start was to, the intent was to get through the first go, and we could come back to something and revisit it. I suspect we could revisit it if the Finance and Audit Committee saw a funding change in it. Maybe we would do it then. But we were going to try to get through. We have a lot of these to get through. It's been a year, and we're still working throughout this year to get through another series of the 100s. So it's not immediately in the queue.
So it's going to be in the future, but you have no idea.
Correct.
Okay, so 6 months, a year, 2 years.
Sounds, yeah, I think 6 months would be very rapid, truthfully, unless on the committee, you guys see it differently.
Oh, that's easy.
My comment on that would be, it's got to fit into the priorities, right? And so we do have, and we're getting really close. We have like 6 or 8 maybe of the 100 series policies left to do. Of course, they're the hard ones. They have the most content and they're the most meaningful. And I have looked at it for quite some time to see how old some of them are or where the real sticky points are on those. But oftentimes, it is priority. We have problems to solve in there. And so I think that's what the Committee on Policy needs to do with grant assistance, is kind of look through what our upcoming agenda is. And within the Committee on Policy, prioritize that request for discussion on, or essentially a brand new policy on director education, and see where it fits. I do think that, sort of 6 months is optimistic to get through what's currently left. But if there's some easy ones on there, they may not be priority, and we may be able to put this in front of that, assuming no other priority policy matter comes up.
But so while it's on our mind, this is 6 years old. So working diligently over a couple months to bring it current from 2017. Yeah, 2017 is the big push, but we can take a look at education, stipends, those things that come up from the board, and put that back into the queue.
So we brought it up to date, and it is an important policy, but we brought it up to date by basically just saying some of the practices simplify a little bit. You don't have to have 3 seats. Let's catch up to the rest of the world and do it per diem and such. So the one hard question on this was, how does this board address director education? And I believe I'm hearing you're punting.
Well, can I chime in on this? I really think we need a full board discussion on the education question. I think it should be on the agenda at some point to say, what do we think? So many of us have been to all these meetings. Let's talk, I'm not sure what an education policy would be. So I'd like to talk philosophically about what that should be before we take it, because we're looking at kind of hard definitions of things. And, so that would be my suggestion, that we put that on the agenda for maybe a couple of months from now or something on a board meeting.
And so that's a fair point. And it goes, my comment now goes to both Kirsten and Nicole's. They're bringing up things that are only very adjacently related to, the policy that we're talking about right now. And that probably do need attention at the full board level. And it's a bit of a failing that we currently have in terms of what is that process, how do we make it happen, how do we elevate something to the agenda. And it's something that Rachel had asked about 2 months ago and that I committed to working through and then recommitted again yesterday that I'm sorry it didn't happen before this meeting, but it will happen before next meeting. I will put together some definition of the hurdle one must jump to get something onto the agenda, in some reasonable time frame. So keep that in mind, and we should discuss it further. And the same with director of education. I totally agree with what Joe's saying that this is a philosophical topic.
So Ted, I don't get how this is adjacently, I believe was the word you related. It says it's the education. It says it's a director of education and travel policy. So I don't get this.
Sorry, I just.
And this has been being kicked around for the last 2 months because it was in the policy committee 2 months ago. I expressed, hey, we are mixing and matching. We're putting our education, we're just kind of sidelining it by having one sentence about it. And the rest of this is, so this is not like, oh, supplies, let's just throw a wrench into the work. That's one.
You're welcome to vote against policy.
Oh, I absolutely am.
Okay.
With no date or ever going to look at it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
Call the question.
We have to vote on calling the question now.
Well, no, we have
No.
a motion on the.
We have to vote on calling the question.
Yeah, so.
All in favor of calling the question, you're going to vote with no further discussion on policy 100.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay,
Okay. So that passes. Right, okay, so now move on to the vote. Go ahead, John.
All right, it's moved and seconded, been called to question. All those in favor of passing 109 as written,
Aye.
raise your hand, say aye. Those opposed,
Tim,
same sign.
in
The three of you, Tim,
Where's he on? So,
Oh, he's got a hand up, Drew. You have a hand up.
Nay.
He's a name.
Tim, you're a nay.
I'm a nay.
Tim's a nay, okay, so nays are, nay is 3 nays, Tim and Rachel, okay. Oh, sorry.
Graham, could you give the count, please, for the nays? Thank you.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in yays and 3 nays.
and one action.
And one absent.
And Rachel left.
Rachel, yes, Rachel was absent. Wait, so let me count again. 1, 5, 8, 3, and 1. Yeah,
Yes, now it's not in the.
that's right, yeah. So, right. Yes, Pat.
Just to be picky, Matt.
Okay, John, yeah, motion passes. Anything else from the committee on policy?
we'll have our next policy out to you for review and the start of redlining, and try not to have it be multiple months. And subsequently, I would be willing to not to take it on from the committee as we get through some of our 100 series stuff for me to address from the committee with the president to bring it back onto as an agenda item for us to have that philosophical discussion. So it doesn't have to be just nebulously out there. I'll be, as we get through some more 100s, address that with Ted.
Thank you. Okay, that gets us through board action. So now we will be skipping the things that we have completed, including the lunch break.
You think there's another board action?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, for our.
Right.
It's in Nebraska, the days in Washington.
26, 15,
We saw Kirsten raise her hand online and now she's raising.
I would like to nominate myself to be the voting delegate for the NRECA Region 7. September 26th to 28th in Omaha, Nebraska.
Any other nominations or? None, all in favor, I don't know if we need to vote.
I think we could just do acclamation.
Acclamation. Thank you very much, Kirsten.
Nobody else wants to spend the weekend in Omaha?
We all.
Steak and whiskey.
Right. Where was that?
Oh.
That's what you said. Okay,
An alternate listed too.
we should have that.
Yep, we typically have Jessica as the alternate, so.
I'll make a motion that we appoint Kristen as the voting delegate and Jessica as the alternate to the NRCA meeting.
Second.
Second, been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor of that motion? Aye. Any opposed? Or abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Again. Okay, I think we, did we get through your report, Graham?
Yeah, nobody had any questions left when we went to Matt.
Yeah, and then I quickly went to Matt. Yeah. Which gets us down to actual director reports, of which roundup is first on the list.
All righty, on the roundup on the spreadsheet, we had the award to Archuleta seniors and Durango Rocky Mountain Swim, 3,000, total amount 6,000. And that's what pretty much our monthly funding is. Updated reserve is 21,107, so we look good with the reserve and what was handed out. On the educational grant, Prime River shares 5,000, and that was the amount awarded and what we had to award. Started out 15, now we're at 10,418, so we're looking great on the reserves on that. So did a great job. I'd say thank you to Nicole for attending. I was unable to attend, but we did great on the spreadsheet. Any question?
So on Pine River Shares, they get an education grant. I know what are they doing? I'm just kind of curious.
So they have a program with their youth where they basically give them a stipend to come in and brainstorm ideas and then to execute them. And so there was like a $24,000 program that, they give them pizza, they give them a certain hourly for any time that's spent coming up with a plan and executing them for, just general betterment of the community.
So is that specifically related to food?
Let me pull up my notes for that actually real quick. Engage 25 youth annually, meeting supplies, stipends, it's not staff, just volunteer support. They get $25 for 6 hours of planning, implementing, and evaluating projects they put in. And they had 80 volunteer members last year that were helping.
So they can come up with.
I think it was like these kids that came in and they're like, yeah, we're gonna give you some food, we're gonna give you a little bit of money, and you're gonna take this, act like this is a job.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would comment that I've been aware of Pine River Shares and for many years, and I've donated to them myself, and they're a very effective organization. They don't waste money. I think this will be a really helpful grant, and it will be well utilized. So just as a comment, thanks.
Anything else for roundup report? Then we'll move on to tri-stakeholder.
Okay, first thing I wanted to do is apologize to Joe and Nicole. They wanted to participate in part of the tri-state meeting. They got an access number, but I didn't explain to him, or I didn't follow up with how tri-state handles that stuff. So they weren't able to hook up. But that being said, I'd like to let everybody know that you can go to the board meeting, to the committee meetings, if you would like to, and you can go to a lot of the executive session. You do have to get an access code, and if you decide you want to do it, I'll work with you to make sure that you can get on there and know how it goes about. But I'd encourage you, you don't have to be there for the whole meeting, you can be there for part of it if you want to, but it is open to you as a member of the rec. So the other thing is that as you know, Tri-State did file with FERC to cancel the BEP. And there was no comment made to FERC, so they're expecting it just to come back and be canceled out. Also, the next month in September, early in the month, Tri-State will go into mitigation with United on the Adams County thing. And then we will have a special board meeting right after that, for the normal board meeting, to kind of go over what happened and what kind of direction we're gonna have. So
I'm sorry, did you say mediation or litigation?
mediation.
Mediation.
Oh, mediation. Yeah, mediation to try to, if they can't get anything worked out.
On some of the issues, not all.
That's right. It's kind of in there on exactly. And then we'll have a little bit more on that. The report in the book is kind of simple and brief. But that's not in reality to the meetings. The heavy lift is actually an executive session, and it is a heavy lift right now. Tri-State has a lot of stuff going, so there's not really a good way to discuss that. But you can look at that report to kind of get an idea. And then the last thing I wanted to do is Dwayne has again extended his offer to meet with the board. I would strongly consider, or have you consider having him come. The agenda would be set up by the board, not by Dwayne, so it could be what you're up for. Since I'm not in the executive session with the attorney, I don't know if this is a conflict with legal stuff, but other than that, I mean, the result of them going to the other board meetings of other members is pretty stunning. And some of these other members are not all that friendly with Tri-State either, and yet it's it's been very valuable for them. And Dwayne's only said, any question, nothing's off the table. So please consider that. I'd like to see him come and spend time. He wants to be at a board meeting, not at an annual meeting, because nothing gets done anymore. So I just take that into consideration. Yeah.
Jessica, is that something that you would see that give us a good frame of reference or hear it from the horse's mouth or something? Or is it just gonna be what we already hear or read or see? Do you think is this something that we should we, because it seems like it would need to formally. Yeah, we need to invite him, right? Or we can't just go, oh, Kohler said. Or should we wait?
I think it's always good to hear from him. I think that we have a lot of big issues coming up where we're gonna need, I need your brain power for like the budget and rate increase and those things. So I think it's good to hear from him. I'm just not sure what it would actually accomplish. I mean, I would like to ask him, the biggest question I have is why did they hire the Brazos restructuring firm? And he can't really give us that detail. But it's always good to hear from you.
Well, other than that, I'll take any questions and.
Anybody? Questions, Kohler? Never get away with no questions.
Kohler, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I noticed I guess because you weren't able to get up there, you weren't able to gather the usual reports that you put into the packet. Do you think those will be forthcoming at some point?
No, you should have had all the reports I usually do. I did the external affairs and then I also put the board report in. Those are the two I supply every month. So you should have those.
Yeah.
Maybe I downloaded this PDF before they were put in, but I don't see the usual board report, the Tri-State board report in my packet anyway. All right.
You might want to refresh it. I know it was late coming in. We didn't receive it till Friday night. I think it was 9 o'clock or something. The board meeting was last week. It should be in there.
I don't use the refresh, the online, so I download them as PDFs and I did it Sunday morning and they weren't in there. So I'll go back and look again. If I have a question, I'll let you know. Thanks.
Okay, nice.
Okay, that's it. Kohler and Tri-State, on the fast track, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, my report is in the board packet. there's not a great deal of new information other than I think I mentioned that LaPlata County had put in a request for middle mile funds that would have really benefited the area. Those were not won through the NTIA. So kind of, and actually Colorado as a whole only got 4 million out of this. It was a sizable amount of money, like 900 million. And I think, you know, that doesn't bode well, I think, for us. Some of these funds are, I mean, there's 500-600 miles of middle mile that's just not there. So even with the BEAD funding that's going to be coming, without this kind of middle mile investment into underserved areas, those BEAD funds won't be able to make that last mile connection very well. It'll be prohibitively expensive, or those last mile providers will have to build their own middle mile to get there. Seems unlikely. You know, the BEAD funding of 826 million or something that was given to Colorado, you know, based on comments by the Colorado Broadband Office executive director, who is kind of cautioning that, well, you know, a lot of the underserved areas that need this the most probably won't get it. I think is kind of indicative of how much we're going to have to fight to get that kind of funding here. And that LaPlata County in particular, and maybe with Archuleta, have to step up the game to really produce a better set of maps that show where and where we are not, so that we can actually get that. And I think anything that we can do at LPA to facilitate that will help our members tremendously. But there's good news, but you're going to have all this funding, but everybody's after it. And I suspect a lot of it will go to other places unless we really, really fight for it. Yeah, other than that, I guess you've got the report. If there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them for you.
Joe. Yeah, Tim, I have a question. Talking about the 700 pole replacements. Is that like an actual power pole, or what are we talking about there? You
know? Yeah, that's another ISP, Ting, which purchased a Cedar Networks, I believe, a few years ago, and they're trying very hard to sort of become the fiber provider to the city of Durango. And so part of LPA's, and Dan probably could answer this a little better than I can, but as part of their plan to install this fiber through the city, they needed to do a study and submit an application to LPA for pole attachments. And there's a lot of poles with lots of different providers, you know, broadband attachments already. And in order to clean that up so that they could do it, there was identified something like 700 poles that have to be, I'm not sure if they all need to be replaced, but they have to be cleaned up at least in order to have these pole attachments. And so they made a proposal, I believe, LPA, to be the central place to do that. And then they would help other ISPs who have attachments on there. They would help clean those up and essentially be the point contractor to ensure that that infrastructure was improved to allow what they want to do. They would then charge those ISPs like Fast Track. And so there's real questions about whether a lot of the ISPs about whether they want to give that to another ISP, what it might look like, what's the time frame, a whole host of issues. That doesn't even count the regulatory approvals that they need to get from the city of Durango. So I think it's an indication of where the current infrastructure of broadband, especially in an attractive place like Durango, still needs a sizable investment in order to be able to bring it out in a more effective way. So I'm not sure that completely answered your question, and if Dan wants to add anything to that, feel free.
But I'm assuming they would be looking for financial help from LPEA, right? I mean, that's 700 poles, and what Dave told me earlier is that's a huge amount of money.
My understanding is that that would be an expense that they would have to pay LPEA. It's called make ready cost. They have to pay. It's not LPEA's cost at this point. It's our infrastructure. And if they want to add more things to it, then LPEA has the control of who gets to do that and at what cost. Their proposal, because it's so extensive, what they want to do is to be a single point, I believe, for LPEA, so that, and then they would somehow collect the proportionate costs from other ISPs who already have equipment, broadband attachments to our poles. Is that correct, Dan? Am I explaining that correctly?
Yes.
Great, thanks.
And Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, to my probably.
No, just that sometimes if it's one particular stretch that has, let's say, 4 out of 7 poles need to be changed, they may decide it's more cost effective to go underground through that section. So they'll make that evaluation and leave some behind sometimes. But if those 700 poles are spread amongst thousands,
Right. Any other questions? All right, thank you, everyone.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Tim. No, I didn't, I was just saying, I didn't see any monuments. Yeah, on to CREA, let's call it anything.
Great. The CRA did not have a meeting since our last board meeting, so I do not have a written report. We have a meeting next week on the 23rd, like 24th and 25th. I saw plenty of open slots to Jack's solar farm if anybody is able to go.
Thanks for arranging it.
Yeah. They have a food to table like celebration in September. If I get that date, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I love food. And whiskey. There you go.
And Western United.
Yes, I will be having the board of directors meeting August 24th out by Denver.
All right.
So I'm ready to go.
Fish fry, fish fry.
I'm good.
No whiskey though.
I know whiskey is good, but I do enjoy it.
That's a good one too. You do this thing. Sure.
Okay, end of agenda. Any other final comments?
I love seeing you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Nice seeing you.
Kohler, I just have a question, maybe don't answer, just people mention that they download this in the PDFs. How do you download this document in the PDFs?
Sure. Yep, so what was the question, downloading the board packet?
Yeah, how do you do that?
So in onboard, let's see, I can walk you through it. So if you go the meeting details, there's a download section. And so there you can download the entire board packet. And then below it's an option with any annotations that you've made.
It's actually called the meeting book. So you're downloading the meeting book.
That's great.
Yeah, it's where you get to where.
Can you start?
Where it's hard to get to is to that page you're on. Yeah, we're ordered that one, we're on, doesn't show up.
We done.
So if you're on the main page of onboard,
Which is the dashboard.
you go to the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Select
I'm
that.
going to do an education, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Okay.
Needs to go, but keep talking.
Alright. You can either open the book, which would show the most current version. If you did need to refresh or something, but under downloads here. You can click meeting book and that will download the whole board packet. Nope.